listening to Tales from the Field, a podcast about the field-going adventures of Fish and Wildlife Service employees in the Pacific Northwest and Islands, told by the people who live them. I'm Sarah Levy from External Affairs in Portland, Oregon. In today's podcast, we're going to talk about what it's like to swing in the wind. Like literally swing in the wind, 125 feet down a cliff face, trying to get over to a golden eagle's nest that's still 15 feet away. Eagle coordinator Matt Stuber has had a lot of experience climbing trees and down cliff faces to take genetic samples from eagles, but none quite like this one. This story involves rappelling for eagles, another species that's a cross between a squirrel and a rat, and a cliff-hanging commitment to conservation. Matt works for the Migratory Birds Program. You should give this one a listen.
My name is Matthew Stuber. I am a wildlife biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Region 9, the Columbia Northwest region. My title is the Eagle Coordinator, and what that means is that I handle a lot of permitting issues and management issues for raptors and for eagles in my region. So I'm going to tell you a story today about a neat experience I had in the field. But before I start, I wanted to kind of give you some background on why that experience happened and what brought me out to the field that day and the place that I was in. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is incredibly interested in golden eagle and bald eagle management. For golden eagles in particular, we've been trying to get some research on the ground that helps us manage the species. One such project is a collaboration with New Mexico State University, where we're trying to investigate population structure of eagles with genetics. Essentially, we're trying to build a map of golden eagle genetics across the landscape. This map would be kind of a useful tool if an eagle was found in some place throughout the country. It could be more or less traced back to the area that it was born and fledged from. And my role in the study was to collect genetic samples from nesting golden eagles in the Cascades. Really, Western Oregon and Washington was my target area. And the reason we were interested in getting samples from those areas is because it is an area where sampling hasn't been done. There aren't a lot of genetic samples that we have in our database from this area. Some people might even be surprised to learn that eagles are in this area at all. And many years ago, I would have been in that boat as well. Eagles are widely considered to be an open land raptor, and they are. They do inhabit open lands, but they also seem to be doing pretty well in the Cascades. We know of many nests between Southern Oregon all the way up into Washington in the Cascades. And that's really, we think, is just scratching the surface. We think there's actually a lot more nests in the Cascades than we know about. I strongly suspect that there are. These nests tend to be about a 50-50 mix of in trees and on cliffs. People think of eagles as cliff nesting birds, but they also, believe it or not, can nest in trees and do frequently in the Cascades.
Matt told me that when he was in graduate school years ago, he was surprised to learn that golden eagles nest in the Cascades and Western Washington. These birds live all over North America, and even live in Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Here on the West Coast, they range from Mexico to northern Alaska. They're commonly thought of as open land raptors. Here in the West, that means they typically live in plains and high mountain deserts, and landscapes with sagebrush and other low-lying trees and shrubs. Matt says that they do well in the Cascades. They nest on cliffs, in trees, and in densely forested habitats. The Fish and Wildlife Service and other agencies think that there are actually a lot more golden eagles in the Cascades than they've found.
I remember most of the nests that I've climbed as a part of this study, and other studies as well. Eagle nests can end up being pretty memorable. Sometimes you have crazy poison oak on the hike to the nest. Sometimes you have great views. Sometimes the trees you have to climb are huge. There's often something about it that's memorable. But the nest I'm going to tell you about today was particularly memorable for a variety of reasons. This nest was located on private land in the state of Washington. And also it was up at altitude too, so it was very high up in the Cascades. It took us about an hour of slow driving along a bumpy, windy timber road to get up to the altitude we needed to get to. And even then, we couldn't get within a mile of the nest because the road was still snow covered on the north faces of the mountains. And even on June 23rd, we almost got stuck in a snowbank and had to just walk the last mile to the nest. So after that long ride and the mile-long walk, came around this corner, kind of around these trees, and you really couldn't see all that well because we were in the trees for most of this hike. But as soon as we came around this corner, into view came Mount Rainier, and it felt like it was almost right at eye level. I was going to spend my whole entire time on the rope, rappelling and climbing into this nest with a great view. One of the things that I really like about my job and like about this kind of field work is, studying raptors, you can sometimes find yourself in places where you get literally a bird's eye view, a view that people wouldn't normally get. So I knew kind of right away that I was in for a treat with this nest and a unique experience. Then came the climb. We found where the nest was. I set up my rappel, put on my harness, got all my gear ready to go, and hooked up to the rope and started descending the rope. And I realized as I was going down that I wasn't going to be anywhere near the nest when I got to it. It was about 125 feet down. And by the time I got down there, I was probably dangling on my rope, probably 15 feet away from the cliff the nest was on. So after a few minutes of trying to swing my way over there and feeling a little bit nervous about my situation, kind of exposed, I climbed the rope again, reset it, and was able to climb down rappel down the rope again to another spot, maybe 15, 20 feet away from the nest. And I was able to kind of climb horizontally on the cliff over to it. I was able to get over there, but that whole process took several hours. So finally I'm in the nest now, and in the nest is this very large, I don't know if she's the largest I've ever seen, but a very large female nestling golden eagle. And so she's large, even by eagle standards, she's a big nestling. So after a little bit of coaxing, I finally got her into the bag I was going to use to bring her back up to the surface. And I got her in the bag and had a chance to kind of pay attention and look around in the nest. And right behind where she had been was a pile of prey items. All of it was this animal called mountain beaver, but it's kind of this prehistoric critter, the only member of its genus. It looks like a cross between a squirrel and a rat with no tail. They're not particularly appealing creatures as far as aesthetically, but they're really neat. They're really neat critters. And mom and dad to this youngster had been doing such a good job bringing their nestling food that there was just a pile of food, and the mountain beaver on the bottom of the pile were even starting to rot and smell. So this nestling had so much food it couldn't even eat it all, and she really was huge. So I put all of her in a bag and got her on my back, and I climbed the rope again to the surface, to the top of the cliff. We did our genetic sampling. I took a blood and a feather sample from her. We put a band on her, took a bunch of standard measurements. Then I went back down again. I got back down to the nest with the eaglet, now banded and measured, and got the eaglet safely back into the nest with next to its pile of mountain beaver that it hadn't eaten, and climbed back over horizontally on the cliff and climbed my rope back up to the top and got up there and kind of turned around and took in the scenery one last time, and definitely had the thought that I'm not sure I want to climb that, rappel into that nest again. It was kind of a bear. It was kind of a lot of work, but sometimes you got to put in that work to get a sample. A couple hours of driving, mile of hiking, 3 rappels just to do this one nest. It was a lot of work, but sampling eagle nests is often like that. Sometimes you can work a whole day and only get one sample. That's just the nature of the beast sometimes with these birds that nest in these remote locations.
So, for those of you who may not have totally caught that, Matt was swinging over a sheer cliff face 125 feet down. He was still 15 feet away from the nest and had to swing himself over in order to get to the eagle. Because Matt and his colleagues were meticulously following safety procedures and wearing all of their personal protective equipment, Matt says that he was confident in his safety. Nevertheless, the climb still included what Matt called the pucker factor, which loosely means that it was more nerve-wracking than usual. It was one of those climbs, Matt said, that he could look back affectionately on, but he didn't necessarily enjoy in the moment.
The field work we were doing that day contributed to conservation by helping to supply samples from a part of the country where we really didn't have any genetic samples from young eagles. And the reason young eagles are important is because we know, if we can associate an eagle with its nest, we can kind of put a point on a map as to where those genetics are being passed on. If we just caught an adult in any random month of the year, it's hard to tell where that bird could be from. We didn't have a whole lot of nesting samples from this part of the world, so it was neat for me to be able to help bolster some of those samples and provide that to the study. And hopefully that those samples and that study and that genetic map I was talking about earlier, hopefully that really becomes an important conservation tool for eagles.
Thanks to Matt Stuber, Eagle Coordinator and courageous cliff climber. Matt has climbed many trees and cliff faces to take samples from raptors and has no plans to stop. All music was downloaded from the YouTube audio library and posted for copyright-free uses by their artists. The music included Night on the Town by Track Tribe, Twisted Bandits All Around Me by Nambi, Randy Butternubs by Diala, and Spring Migration by the Great North Sound Society. This is your host, Sarah Levy. Thanks for listening.